Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
5 years ago, just a month before my wedding, I discovered that my fiancée, Kathy, and my brother, Roger, had been having an affair. Kathy, now 30, only came clean because she was pregnant and wanted to keep the baby. The betrayal stung even more because Roger, now 33, and Kathy had been involved since our engagement. Kathy and I had been together since junior year of high school, going through college and everything. Getting engaged had felt like the natural next step after so many years together. But shortly after we got engaged, my brother confessed to Kathy that he had always had feelings for her. With our wedding approaching, he said he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. Somehow, this led Kathy to realize that she, too, had been developing feelings for him. They even flirted behind my back occasionally, even at family gatherings, though she claimed she'd stayed with me because she wasn't certain about Roger. 5 years ago, a few months before my wedding, my entire world shattered. Kathy and my brother, Roger, sat me down along with my parents to break the news. They told me they were planning to be together, and Kathy couldn't marry me because she was in love with Roger and pregnant with his child. I was devastated, struggling even to process it. In my shock, I asked Kathy to come back home with me and end whatever she had going on with Roger. But my mother stepped in firmly, saying that nothing like that was going to happen. She insisted that Roger and Kathy were going to be together and told me I needed to make peace with it, as it was ultimately their decision. I was horrified by her response. She didn't just support them. She acted like my feelings didn't even matter. My dad looked ashamed, at least, and tried to comfort me, but my mom was unapologetically on their side. She even told me that if I had a problem, I should keep it to myself because Kathy was pregnant and in a delicate condition, and I had no right to bother her. It felt like my own mother had turned her back on me. My mother was thrilled at the thought of finally having a grandchild in the family, and her excitement completely overshadowed any concern for what I was going through. She fought me tooth and nail, justifying everything that was happening as if it were somehow acceptable. After that painful confrontation, Kathy moved in with my family since her own parents cut ties with her when they learned the truth. Naturally, my wedding was canceled, and my parents covered the costs to spare me the financial burden. However, my refusal to speak to them led to me being essentially cast out from the family. Over the past 5 years, we haven't had any contact. My father tried reaching out once, but I didn't respond, and since then, it's been total radio silence. It took me a long time and a lot of therapy to begin healing from what happened. Kathy and I had been together for so many years. I truly loved her, so it was a long, painful journey to get to where I am now. I wouldn't say I'm completely over it, but I've learned to cope. Some other family members stayed in touch with me, and through them, I learned that Kathy had a son with my brother. A month after the birth, a paternity test confirmed that Roger was the father, not me. 5 years passed with no contact from my family. Kathy and Roger got married and built a life together, and I assumed everything was going well for them. But about a week ago, my mother unexpectedly reached out. Since she had always been the most vocal supporter of Kathy and Roger's relationship, her call surprised me. Out of curiosity, I called her back after she sent an email saying she urgently needed to speak with me. When I returned her call, she was crying and delivered some painful news. My brother had been in a severe accident, a hit and run. Due to the impact, he slipped into a coma, and the doctors couldn't predict when, or if, he would recover. The accident happened just a week ago, and 3 days after the doctors declared his condition critical, my mother decided to inform me. At first, I thought my mother was calling to ask me to visit Roger in the hospital and support the family during such a difficult time. Despite everything, I could understand why they might want me there, given the severity of Roger's condition. But then my mother took a completely unexpected turn. She told me she wanted me to step up and be there for Kathy and my nephew. Confused, I asked what she meant, and she explained that, with Roger essentially not there anymore, she expected me to step into his role, to support Kathy and her son in every way, not just financially but also by moving in with them and taking care of them. My mother said she would have taken them in herself, but she felt she was too old to manage that responsibility. She even expected me to decide on the spot. I couldn't believe it. After 5 years of silence, my mother's first words to me weren't an apology or an olive branch, but a request that I step in to support the people who betrayed me. Kathy and her son deserve family support right now, but that support shouldn't be coming from me, the one they'd hurt and cast out. I told my mother, firmly, that I wouldn't be doing anything of the sort, and that she was foolish even to expect it. After my mother started arguing with me on the phone, I was already frustrated and didn't want to waste any more energy on it, so I just hung up and blocked her number again. I tried to go on with my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling of sympathy for what Roger and Kathy were going through. Still, stepping in to take my brother's place was out of the question. Roger was still alive, just in a coma, and my mother was acting like he was gone entirely. The whole situation made me feel uneasy. Later, I decided to call my father. He'd usually been the more reasonable of my parents, so I thought he might offer a more balanced perspective. Talking to him after 5 years felt awkward, but after some small talk, I asked him how Roger was doing. He confirmed that things weren't looking good for Roger, which was difficult to hear. I then told him about the conversation with my mother, expecting he'd understand my side or at least offer some reasonable insight. But to my surprise, he agreed with her, saying it was fair for her to ask me to support Kathy and her son. I was stunned. I'd thought my dad would see the strangeness of the request, but instead, he was also pushing me toward the very thing I found unreasonable and unsettling. When I pressed my dad, he confirmed that he meant it. He genuinely thought I should step up for Kathy and my nephew because we had history and I was still family, regardless of the past 5 years. He argued that, as family, I should be the one they can count on in a crisis, and he didn't see my mother's expectations as unreasonable. That response threw me for a loop. I haven't known how to respond since then. For the past week, I've avoided talking to anyone in the family, even other relatives, because I'm worried they'll bring it up, and I'll have to explain myself. I feel like the bad guy for not stepping up for my family when they're in such a tough situation. I know they need support, if not financial, at least emotional. But what my mom is asking feels unnatural and intrusive. I haven't even been to the hospital to see Roger, as the whole situation feels too strange and overwhelming. I also haven't talked to any friends about it because it's so deeply personal. My friends know about the rift with my family since my wedding was called off, but this is a whole new level of awkwardness and confusion. I feel completely lost on how to handle it all, and I'm torn between a sense of obligation to my family and my own need for boundaries. I don't find an acceptable solution, and I feel like I'm slipping back into that dark period of my life, when thoughts of Kathy and Roger consumed me after discovering their betrayal. It took a lot for me to pull myself out of that place, and I don't want to go back there. I've decided not to visit my family for now. It's just too overwhelming. I hadn't even realized how much anxiety this whole situation was causing until I noticed how much it had ramped up over the past week. I've gone back on my anti-anxiety meds and am trying to cope. The outpouring of love and support from people commenting on my original post, and even reaching out personally, has been incredible. I'm deeply grateful for everyone who has reminded me I'm not alone. I've also opened up to a few close friends about what's been happening because I honestly can't handle this all by myself. They've reassured me that choosing not to visit right now is the best thing I can do for myself. They pointed out that, just as Roger and the rest of my family have always put their own needs first, it's time I do the same. Honestly, I don't think I need to be there for them emotionally either. They have each other to lean on. I remember vividly how alone I felt after the wedding was called off, after discovering the betrayal, and how my family chose my brother over me when I needed them most. That's in the past now, and I'm focusing on moving forward from it. I know I won't be able to move on successfully if I reconnect with them, so I've blocked all of my family members again and am committed to not having any contact with them. I genuinely feel sorry for what happened to my brother, and I truly hope he recovers soon. No matter what he's done, I can't bring myself to wish ill on anyone. I hope things work out for them, but right now, I need to focus on my own mental health. I'm considering going back to therapy because I realize how much my parents' comments have affected me. I thought I was coping better, but those old feelings are resurfacing, and I think talking to a professional would be beneficial. I've heard from a few relatives that my brother's condition remains critical, and he hasn't shown any signs of improvement. It's been nearly 2 weeks, and he's still in the hospital. I feel for my family, but there's not much I can do. Everyone else who knows my family has visited the hospital at least once in these past 2 weeks to offer their condolences, while I have stayed away. I would have considered visiting, but I learned from my relatives that my parents have been talking negatively about me to anyone who visits. They're portraying me as the bad guy, claiming they asked me to come and support the family, but I refused. They've even suggested that this situation is karma for what happened 5 years ago, saying my brother deserves this. For the record, I never said anything like that. Some relatives reached out to confirm if these accusations were true, knowing it didn't sound like something I would say, given that I generally try to be a nice person. When they asked, I made it clear that my parents were lying to make me look terrible, likely as a reaction to my decision to cut ties with them. It really disappointed me to hear they were spreading such falsehoods, especially after they had already disrupted my life once. I'm grateful that my relatives came to me for clarification. If they had just taken my parents' word for it, I might have found myself isolated from the entire family again. Over the past 5 years, while I haven't spoken to my parents, my aunts, uncles, and cousins have all supported me. I really didn't want to lose that connection, and it seems my parents couldn't stand that I still had those relationships, so they tried to sabotage them too. I just can't comprehend why they harbor so much hatred toward me. I've never done anything to deserve this. My brother and I have never had a close relationship, and my parents have always favored him, but this feels excessive and completely unnecessary. My mother decided to reach out to me again. Since I had blocked them on all platforms, she had no choice but to come to my house to talk to me. When I returned home from work, she was already there, waiting for me. To be honest, I wasn't in the mood to talk because I was exhausted from work. I almost considered getting back in my car to avoid her, but she spotted me, so I had no choice but to engage. I didn't want to let her into my house because it would be difficult to get rid of her once she was inside. Instead, I opted to speak with her in the front yard, which turned out to be a bad idea because she eventually started yelling, drawing the attention of our neighbors. The conversation began on a relatively calm note. She made some small talk, and I responded politely. However, I couldn't hold back any longer and asked her why she was spreading falsehoods about me to portray me as the bad guy. I told her it wasn't fair, especially since I've never wished harm on my family, despite how they've treated me. I genuinely just wanted to move on with my life, but they were making that incredibly difficult for me. I had kept these feelings bottled up for so long that when I finally saw her, everything just spilled out. I couldn't help myself. In the end, I told her that, given everything that had happened, it was hard for me to think of them as a family because they had never treated me like one. I expressed my disappointment in their behavior and made it clear that whatever she had come to discuss could wait. I had just gotten home from work and wasn't in the mood to fight or engage in an emotionally draining conversation. Up until that point, she had been listening to me calmly, but when I said I didn't want to talk to her at that moment, she got really angry. She claimed she was there to apologize for everything I had mentioned and said that she and my father had finally realized they hadn't treated me well over the past 5 years. She acknowledged that I was obviously upset, and that was why I hadn't been visiting my brother in the hospital. She insisted she came to sort things out between us because she felt the family should stick together for the sake of emotional stability during this tough time. However, after I told her I wasn't in the mood to talk, she flipped and decided to yell at me instead. She told me that I should just be grateful I still have a family at all, especially after how I reacted when I learned about my brother's accident. She said she had half a mind to cut me off completely and make sure the rest of my relatives did the same. I was confused by her accusation, so she elaborated, explaining that she believed my reaction wasn't sad enough. Apparently, she expected me to show more emotion when I heard the news, but I sounded indifferent on the phone. No matter our personal issues, hearing something like that would undoubtedly affect me, and it genuinely did. I never wished anything bad on anyone, including my family, despite our strained relationships. I was upset about his accident, but perhaps that didn't come through in my voice since she couldn't see my face. Her reasons were completely baseless and illogical. She even went so far as to say that my lack of support for Kathy and my nephew, and my refusal to step up for my brother, demonstrated how little I cared for the family. She was just fabricating things again to justify their behavior, and I honestly think my parents are starting to lose their marbles because this whole situation is completely bizarre and unnecessary. Once she started yelling at me, I lost all interest in continuing the conversation, so I decided to go inside my house and asked her to leave. After a while, I unlocked the door and stepped inside while she was still shouting at me. When she tried to follow me in, I shut the door in her face and told her to go away because I was seriously angry and didn't want to interact with her anymore. She continued to argue, but I threatened to call the police, and that's when she finally left, though not before cursing me and saying I would face consequences for my actions. I have no idea what that means, and honestly, I'm not interested in finding out. I just want to relax and move on with my life. So, it's been 26 days since the accident, and my family finally has some good news to share. Of course, they didn't tell me personally. I found out through my cousins. The good news is that my brother is finally showing signs of improvement. He's no longer in a coma and is responding better, which is a positive sign. I truly hope he continues to improve from this point onward because the last month has been really stressful for everyone, including me, even though I'm no longer part of the family and have been effectively cast out. The way my parents have been treating me over the past 26 days has really shown me how unhinged they are. It feels like they've just been taking out their frustrations on me. After my last interaction with my mother, which I mentioned in my previous update, I didn't hear from her for a couple of days. Then my father decided to call me, but he used a different number than usual, so I didn't recognize it was him. As soon as I answered, he started yelling at me without giving me a chance to hang up. He was quite sneaky about it, trying to catch me off guard by calling at 5 o'clock in the morning, knowing I'd be asleep and groggy when I picked up. After a few calls, I finally answered the fourth one, and he immediately launched into an angry tirade about how ungrateful I was and how he wished I had never been born. He claimed he would ensure that the rest of the family never spoke to me again because I hadn't even bothered to visit my brother in the hospital while he was suffering and wasn't there for the family. After ranting for nearly 5 minutes, my father was the one to hang up, leaving me to process everything he'd just said. By the time I was ready to respond, he had already blocked my number. At the time, it wasn't very amusing, but looking back, I find it quite funny how desperate my parents are to paint me as the bad guy. They go to such extremes to yell at me over trivial matters. I've mentioned before that I believe they were just taking out their frustrations on me. They needed a scapegoat, and I happened to be the one. But it's fine because my father hasn't succeeded in turning the rest of the family against me. They know I'm not in the wrong and remember what happened 5 years ago. Now that my brother's condition is improving, I just hope my parents will ease off and focus on him instead. It's been 3 years, and so much has changed, mostly for the better. I've been living in Germany for work for the past year and a half, and I've started a relationship with my girlfriend. We've been together for 8 months now, and it's been truly blissful. Over the past 3 years, I've had no contact with my family, which has also been a blessing, to be honest. I've stayed in touch with my relatives who are kind to me, which has been nice. My brother hasn't fully recovered from the accident. While he survived, he is paralyzed below the waist. Kathy reached out to apologize for everything that happened in the past, but I told her that at this point, an apology felt meaningless and unnecessary. She visited me with a bouquet after some relatives, who knew I was moving to Germany for work, informed her. However, my brother couldn't join her because he felt too ashamed about what happened 8 years ago and, of course, because he cannot walk. My parents tried to call me, but this time I made it clear that they are no longer part of my life. I told them it would be better if we never interacted again, as the next time they called, they would be reaching out to a stranger. Since then, I've been in Germany, and my parents don't speak to me anymore, which I'm really happy about. I have a new girlfriend, and we are planning to get married soon. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.